Hey everyone, welcome to today's video. And today we're going to be talking about the largest demographic of Democratic primary voters that Joe Biden is going to attempt to court in the general election if he's going to try and solidify his lead over Donald Trump, which currently is at about 8% in the Real Clear Politics aggregate polling. So these voters are typically more liberal, typically lower income. A greater percentage of Bernie Sanders supporters had an income level of less than $50,000 or less than Joe Biden's did, and a greater percentage of Joe Biden's voters had an income level of greater than 100,000. They're also typically younger than the group of than Joe Biden supporters, and a lot of them see Joe Biden as too moderate. Um, the voters in this column comprise the majority of the section of the Democratic electorate who said that they were more concerned about the direction of the policies of the presidential candidate that the Democrats would put forth than their ability to defeat Donald Trump. Now, more than 60% of Democratic primary voters, however, said that defeating Donald Trump was a was a bigger priority for them than electing a candidate who matches most closely with their values. So that helped contribute to Joe Biden, particularly on Super Tuesday, which really reignited Joe Biden's campaign and put him on track to now become the Democratic nominee now that he has secured the number of delegates that he needs. So, in order to talk about this, I wanted to first talk um, about the Democratic primary voters' second choice candidates, which I think is really important. In order for us to figure out if Bernie Sanders voters will go to Joe Biden, we need to figure out if they were comfortable considering him in the primaries in the first place, really. And so this is from a 538 article that was done back in September. I'm sorry, not September, December, right after Senator Kamala Harris announced that she was withdrawing from the Democratic presidential primary. Um, and so down here we can see the percentage of the who the major primary contenders' second choice candidates were, and you may be surprised to find that among Biden supporters, the greatest proportion of them, in the event that Joe Biden were to drop out, would go to Bernie Sanders. 26% of Joe Biden supporters said that Bernie Sanders was their second choice for president, compared to 19% for Warren, 12% for Buttigieg, and 9% for Bloomberg. Now, what's perhaps even more surprising is that 26% of Sanders supporters also said that they would go to Biden in the event that Sanders dropped out. However, that is the second largest group of Bernie Sanders supporters announcing their second choice. 31%, however, said that they would go to Warren. Followed by 4% of Sanders supporters would go to Pete Buttigieg, and 3% would go to Bloomberg. For Warren, it was 19% of her voters said that their second choice was Biden. 30% said that their second choice was Sanders, and for Bloomberg voters, 35% of his voters said that Biden was their second choice, compared to 11% for Sanders and Warren, 13% for Buttigieg. So, as we can see, for a lot of Bernie Sanders supporters, Biden was actually relatively palatable. Um, Granted, there was still a very large majority of Bernie Sanders supporters who said that they would not consider Joe Biden their second choice, um, and some of whom are part of your Bernie or bust crowd who don't want to support Biden at all, even now that Biden is the nominee. So now, where we see most of this discontent with Biden as the presidential nominee is amongst younger voters. And if we look at this poll, 47% of the youngest Bernie Sanders backers have an unfavorable view of Biden versus 44% who have a favorable view. And amongst these youngest Sanders supporters, they're slightly more inclined to opt out of a Biden-Trump choice in November than older backers, according to this Morning Consult article that I have up here on my screen. Now, this is going to become a problem for Biden, because he needs to court younger voters who have not participated in the political system if he's going to try to drive turnout in places with a population that is getting younger. Now, also, if we look here, the age makeup of Sanders supporters: 36% were 18 to 29, 31% were 30 to 44, 12% were 45 to 54, 12% were 55 to 64, and 9% were 65 plus. So Bernie Sanders support is pretty evenly spread out, with a larger concentration in younger generations, whereas Biden supporters were 10% 18 to 29-year-olds, 19% 30 to 44-year-olds, 16% 45 to 54-year-olds, 24% 55 to 64-year-olds, and 32% 65 plus year old. So Biden's support is also pretty consistent down the line, pretty well spread out, but there is a concentration of particularly older voters. Bernie Sanders takes the cake by far amongst more liberal voters in the Democratic primary. 69% of Bernie supporters said that they were ideologically liberal, compared to 55% of Biden supporters. Bernie Sanders supporters also were a greater portion of them were male compared to Sanders supporters, to Biden supporters. 48% of Bernie Sanders supporters were male, 52% were female. Biden supporters were 45% male, 55% female, and then again we see here a greater portion of Biden supporters were concentrated, or of Sanders supporters, I'm sorry, were concentrated at the lower end of the economic scale, compared to Biden, who amongst people with income levels of $50,000 or less, only 45% of his supporters came from there. So now, however, this does beg the question: Are Sanders supporters ultimately going to end up breaking for Joe Biden? And one would be remiss if not to think that there is going to be a very large percentage of Bernie Sanders supporters who aren't going to support Joe Biden. He's sort of he's the personification of the moderate establishment Democratic power structure that Bernie was emphatically against and sort of represented the fight against. However, if we look in the following poll, a new poll shows that 77% of Bernie Sanders supporters still said that they would back Joe Biden. However, a majority of those Bernie supporters who say that they would back Joe Biden aren't excited about Joe Biden. This comes from a Suffolk University USA Today poll, which showed that of the 77% of Bernie Sanders supporters who said that they would back Joe Biden, 60% said that they're not very excited or not at all excited, compared to 38% who said they were somewhat or very excited to vote for Joe Biden. So now, while you see that big number, 77% of Bernie supporters will back Joe Biden, and you think, that's a majority, that's going to help Joe Biden immensely. It is important to remember that with the majority of them not being excited to vote for Joe Biden, that could drive the sort of low turnout that is part of what hurt Hillary Clinton in 2016, which was lower turnout amongst lower turnout than expected amongst minority populations uh, that Clinton didn't have as much appeal to as polls would lead us to believe. And as we can see here, contrary to the sort of Bernie Bros mentality, that Sanders supporters were mostly young white liberals, a greater proportion of Bernie Sanders supporters were non-white than Joe Biden supporters were. Um, so if Joe Biden is to win states with higher concentrations of Hispanic populations, like the all important states of Arizona and Florida, he's going to need to appeal to more Bernie Sanders supporters, and he's going to need to have those Bernie Sanders supporters be excited about his candidacy if he's going to expect them to actually show up at the ballot box for him in November. Now, as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, one of the most noteworthy surrogates for the Bernie Sanders campaign back in the primary season, said on The View, the process of courting Bernie Sanders supporters to the Joe Biden camp it is going to be a work in progress up until the election. Now, in an attempt to try and court some Bernie Sanders supporters, Biden has announced that he would lower the early enrollment age to enroll in Medicare to 60. However, Representative Ocasio-Cortez pointed out that that was even more conservative than Hillary Clinton's proposal to lower the early enrollment in Medicare to 50. So for Bernie Sanders supporters, that's not going to cut it. However, something like Biden's promise to enact a $15 minimum wage, that's something that could attract more Bernie supporters if Biden could focus attention to it. Something like Biden's pledge to triple the child care tax credit, that's something that could theoretically court some more Bernie supporters. So for Bernie supporters, when it comes to Biden, it's going to take a lot more than just the majority of them saying that they'll go out and support Joe Biden. In states where Bernie Sanders was very popular, like Colorado, which he won in the primaries, like Iowa, which he won the popular vote in the primaries, like New Hampshire, which he won the popular vote, and Nevada, another swing state where Bernie Sanders won in the primaries, where Bernie Sanders is more popular than Joe Biden. It is going to take more concessions from Joe Biden if he's going to try and get those voters to show up for him in November. And the messaging from the Biden campaign that this is about defeating Donald Trump, this is about, as Joe Biden puts it, the soul of the nation, that does not resonate with Bernie Sanders supporters as much as it's going to need to if Biden is going to drive the turnout in states where Bernie is popular, where he needs to win, places like Michigan, Wisconsin. Even though Biden won both of those states in the primaries, they were still lost in 2016 by Hillary Clinton after Bernie won Wisconsin and Michigan in the primaries. So in states like that where Bernie is pretty popular, states like Nevada, New Hampshire, Iowa, Joe Biden's going to need to hedge support, going to need to focus attention to the fact that he would triple the child care tax credit, that he has been unapologetically pro-union for pretty much his whole career, that he's been that he wants a $15 minimum wage. Those are the things that he's going to need to hit. Those are the Bernie Sanders platform positions that Biden is going to want to hedge on if he's going to drive turnout amongst this younger, more liberal, less racially homogenous group that supported Bernie Sanders if Biden is going to win in November. So thank you all so much for watching or listening on the Anchor app or on Spotify. Please feel free to leave a comment below. Tell me what you want to hear more about. Tell me what I could be doing better. And yeah, please leave a like, comment, subscribe if you're on YouTube, and I will see you all in the next video. Thank you guys so much.